the importance of history?
History has always been important, but history is, I think, even more important these days. History, there is a quote from a book called What is History by E.H. Carr that says, history is to society as memory is to the individual. It is the thing that gives us, whatever culture, whatever country, it's the thing that gives us context, just like one's memories give a person context in their lives. But it's important that history is good history. And by that I mean that it has been properly researched, that it hasn't been manipulated in any way. And I think that has become even more important. I mean, there have been many instances throughout history where history has been used to justify a regime, an action by a particular country. And it can be twisted, it can be manipulated. You know, the idea is that he who controls the present controls the past. So particularly in, shall we say, fascist regimes, even in communist regimes, history can be manipulated to the current truth. And I think it's important that people have an understanding of that, and that they realise what is truth and what is fiction and what is manipulation.
How easy is it to actually realise if history has been manipulated or not, especially if we go into the distant past? Because
Well, this is it. I suppose what you have to be careful about is how you present it. There are, as you go further back in history, there are fewer and fewer actual sources. You have to be careful about how you interpret those sources. You have to remember the provenance of them, where they've come from, who they were written by, or who they were left by, why. And I think it is important to come at those sources with a degree of open-mindedness, and to realise that they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you everything about a particular person or a particular event. And so it's important that you use careful language, that you only take things, you know, as far as you can, in all honesty, with that source.
Rather than presenting it as like a dogma without any skepticism.
Yeah. And I think the issue that we have today is history is as important as it ever was, perhaps more so, because with social media, with the supposed availability of material online, on screen, wherever, it is ever more easy to manipulate. And perhaps we still need those people who are properly trained to analyse sources, to think about sources as truthfully and honestly as possible, to present the history. It's so easy. I feel that myths are being presented as truth now.
For example?
Well, I suppose one of the things that I might say, and this is a little bit controversial, but in India, they've just opened a site, haven't they, on what was the site of a mosque, Ayodhya or somewhere like that.
I think so. Yeah, they're rebuilding it. Yeah,
they have rebuilt. Well, as far as I have learned from a friend, that the mosque was destroyed because supposedly it had been built on a very important Hindu site. But in actual fact, architecture suggests that there might have been an earlier temple there, but not as early as they are saying. So where is the truth? Who's listening to the truth? Who's manipulating the truth to their ends, you know? Because you have destroyed one religious site to replace it with a larger site, presumably to make a political statement.
And you've used history almost as a weapon.
And you've weaponized history to a degree. But I would say, again, I say that with some reservation, because it's not an aspect of history that I would consider myself to be expert in. But, and I think you only have to listen to Donald Trump and some of the things that he has said about the past.
Yeah, like make America great again.
Like make America great again, like the election, the 2020 election was stolen from him. You know, it wasn't, but there are people who believe that. And there are people presenting that as fact, as history.
Yeah.
It's the more, yeah, the whole make America great again. When you look at American history, like it's got very dark history, slavery, crazy racism, even like the education systems, and
even when it was founded on the ethnic cleansing of the native population.
Yeah.
So are you saying we should go back to that? What does it mean?
Yes, exactly. What does make America great again mean? But then again, people would say about history, history is always open to reinterpretation, but the reinterpretation has got to be based on good history and good understanding of the facts and the evidence that is available. And it should be, you do come to a decision about the past, but you should at least view it initially with an impartial eye. History does change. History is not set in concrete. History changes as we discover sources, as we move through the present. History does change. How many countries don't have a dark past?
Probably none.
Yeah, I mean, the British Empire. The British Empire's role in the triangular trade with slaves. Africa's role in the triangular trade with slaves. History is always open to reinterpretation and reevaluation. It isn't set in stone, but it's got to be done. Well, it's got to be done based on sources and not just people's opinions.
Yeah, there has to be a method to it. It can't
There's
just
got
be
to be a methodology.
Yeah. I saw something quite amusing recently where someone said, I just looked back throughout history until today, and it seemed like coincidentally the good guys won every single time. And that's kind of what we're presented almost.
Yeah, but then on the other hand, there will be people who say, well, history is written by the victors.
Yeah, exactly.
And to a degree that's right. I mean, and also there's an awful lot of history that not just the losers have been written out of, but also women have been written out of.
You've got decades of experience teaching history in the UK. What have you noticed in the UK education system that it's lacking, that the history curriculums are lacking, or the way it's taught?
I would say that the history curriculum has become a lot narrower, particularly in terms of GCSE. I mean, having worked in the independent sector latterly, I would say that we at least had the freedom to choose what we taught. But in terms of the way in which we look at history, I think we have become increasingly focused on the more recent past. And I think we've also suggested to students that the only past that is relevant is the very recent past. It's got to have some meaning to them, but also I might add focus on British history. You know, that has narrowed it considerably. Yes, I think if you live in Britain, it's nice to have an understanding of your country's history, but it's also good to have an understanding of your country's role in wider history and to have an appreciation of the history of other cultures.
Yeah, I totally agree, because colonialism, for example, that took place, or like the East India Company. Oh, I forgot.
Yeah, East India Company.
Yeah, East India
that
Company.
was colonialism.
Yeah, so like for example, we are not taught about that until we get into a university, and for example, like you know, we spoke about certain conflicts, like whether it's the Kashmir or whether it's like the Palestine situation that's happening, and people, like some British people say like, oh, like what has UK got to do with this? But when you look at Balfour Declaration, or when you look at the East India Company, and it's like I'm like, are you not being taught this in schools? And they haven't.
No, well, they haven't been taught that in schools, but I suppose as well.
If you enjoyed this segment, please make sure to like and subscribe. Also, the link to the full podcast is in our description. And finally, I wanted to say that please make sure to follow and download the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so we can bring you more amazing content. Thank you so much for listening.